Good morning, misters, maids, and mistresses, and welcome to another episode of Henries Heresies, where we bring you the latest news on sensations, scandals, and schisms, here from the politically neutral city of Nuremberg. I'm your host, Sir Edward 25th and a half, and today we have a very special guest. And I've been meaning to have him on the show ever since he became the Archbishop of Canterbury, or the Papal Legate, whatever they tried to call him, back in 1535. But now, exactly 21 years later, on the 6th of March, we have him. Welcome, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, mailing into the show all the way from Bocardo Prison in Oxford, where he is being held before appearing to the people for his execution. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hello, Sir Edward. Thank you for having me in this dark hour. Perhaps this will be an opportunity to get the fair hearing that I have thus far been denied.
Not likely. So, Tom, could you tell us exactly how you got into this little situation you are in now?
Well, I have always allowed my conscience to get me into trouble, and that's what got me here now. Originally, I was charged with treason, but now I stand here on charges of heresy, which, for me, is much better. I would be ill at ease suffering for a political cause, but I'm always glad to suffer for the cause of Christ. As you must know, I spent my tenure as Archbishop doing all in my power to guide England towards true religion found in the ideals of the Reformation, and I have served as ably and as loyally as I can under two kings. And now Queen Mary, though it is quite clear that my service is something that she's been displeased by. It is my unwillingness to recant of my convictions that has put me here, for I will not acknowledge the authority of the Pope over England, nor will I propagate lies about the presence of Christ in the Lord's Supper. For that, and I suspect for proclaiming Mary illegitimate by divorcing her mother from King Henry, I am in this cell.
That's a tough one. Well, Tom, here on Henries Heresies, we always like to look into our guest's love life. Could you tell us a little bit about your two marriages? I heard you married a smoking hot bartender back in your college days, and then later married again to a priest daughter here in Nuremberg. I know that your first marriage whipped up a lot of gossip back in the day, but both of them you try to keep hard a secret. Could you just enlighten us on those, Tom?
Well, my marriage wasn't a secret, though at times it might have been easier if it was. I was married to a woman who worked at the Dolphin Inn, Joan. I had to give up my academic career to marry her because at the time, though I wasn't ordained, you couldn't hold that position and be married. So I had to accept a far more lowly position, and on account of that, throughout my whole life, I've been called a hosteler and worse, as a way to demean me. But that's far from the worst thing. The worst thing is that Joan died shortly after we were wed in childbirth, along with the baby. But as for my second wife, she was the niece of a priest, not her daughter. It was here in Nuremberg that I first experienced the Reformation firsthand, and I was swept away by the ideals that they propagated. And one of those ideals was the idea that clergy should be married. I expected to be an ambassador on the continent for far longer than I actually was. And quite honestly, being appointed the Archbishop of Canterbury so nearly after my marriage made things very complicated. I've at times had to send my wife Margaret back to the continent whenever it's been tense times here in England, but I don't regret it for a few reasons. Obviously, Margaret has been a faithful and loving wife our entire time together. But also, I'm a living example of what I believe, which is that clergy should be allowed to be married. My marriage has survived to the present day. For obvious reasons, I've had to send Margaret back to Germany, but I fear I won't have the chance to recall her this time.
Hey, Tom, the reception here is pretty bad. We need to get a new horse for our mail carrier, so I only heard about half of what you said. But tell the fans, please, here, about your first big decision to nullify the marriage between King Henry and Catherine and allow his marriage to Anne. What was going on in your head when you did that?
In all honesty, the decision to permit his divorce was not my decision. It was the decision of the greatest scholars of the Bible in Europe. We did everything we could to consult canon law, and more importantly, the scriptures about what was lawful. I have lived my life by the conviction that the King of England is the head of the English Church, and I deny any right of the Pope to proclaim unlawful that which is found in scriptures to be lawful. And I believe that what he did was in accordance with true religion. After she lost faith with King Henry, I advocated for Anne when all others deserted her, and I did my level best to guide His Majesty in all his marriage, to live in light of Scripture regarding this and all other things during his reign. In my many years of service to King Henry, I never once failed to tell him when I thought that he was in the wrong. We remained friends to his dying day, not because I was his yes man, but because I was the only one who would tell him no when I thought he was wrong. At the end of the day, whatever he thought, he was the final authority of the visible church here in England. He was appointed by God to be the minister of the realm, and I was appointed by him to serve at his leisure.
Thomas Cranmer, everyone! Archbishop, quiet scholar, and charming with the ladies. Be sure to buy a copy of his English translation of the Bible and the 1549 Book of Common Prayer in a store near you. Now, we transition over to our second part of the show, where I call in my co-host, ironically whose name is also Tom, and we talk about the hot topic that's on everyone's mind. That's right, theology. Tom, where are you calling in from today?
Well, it's a little bit roomier than Cranmer's cell, but I'm here in the German province of Baden, and definitely not in the small Pennsylvanian hamlet of the same name.
Wow, sounds exciting. So, Tom, you heard all the conversations we had with Cranmer. What do you think about him? Is he the real deal or what?
Oh, absolutely, sir, but I think he's being completely forthright. It's amazing how well he's held up considering the conditions that Queen Mary must be holding him in, and with such integrity. After all, the man has served as the spiritual head of England for 2 monarchies, and it is in Mary's best interests to discredit him in any way that he can. The recantations that he has signed thus far have been rather insubstantial, and we can have no doubt that they will do their very best to force him to put his name to things which, throughout his entire career, he has been contrary to.
Yeah, well, some fans called in a couple of days ago through smoke signals, and they mentioned some really horrible things Cranmer did underneath King Henry's reign. But they said he also did some great things like taking care of the sick, being extremely generous, and subtly introducing Reformation ideals into England. The people want to know, is he just a flopsy pawn to the king and evil to the core, or honestly a good man who wanted to be obedient to God and the king and just a little weak around the edges?
Oh, it seems far too much to say that Cranmer has been a dishonest man or just a mere pawn of the king. Now, it is true that he's been put in difficult dilemmas throughout his entire life, but I think that he's acted as conscientiously as is possible in pushing England towards reform while holding on to his principles of fair play. Cranmer is a man who believes that the king, or in this case the queen, is the lawful head of the church, and he has done his best to operate within that limiting framework. You could even say that his recantations that have come out thus far are in line with this thinking, for whereas he must acknowledge Mary as the legitimate head of the English Church, she has put herself under the authority of the Pope, and so only inasmuch as she has submitted to him, so too must Cranmer. We also shouldn't forget that his admissions about the authority of the Pope were given under extreme duress, as we have covered previously, and remain ambiguous at best.
And finally, before the commercial break, Tom, tell me, as an expert in the field, how Protestant is Tom? Tom Cranmer, I mean. Oh, this is annoying. Do you think his recantations were legit, or was it all just a ploy and he's going to reverse it before getting burned alive?
Well, I think it's quite clear that he's Protestant, personally, and that he's been that as much as he's been allowed during his tenure as Archbishop. I mean, after all, throughout his career he's done everything he can to champion the cause of the Reformation, oftentimes at great personal danger. Under King Henry, he's chipped away as he can at those sorts of policies which have persisted long in tradition that he's found to be wrong-headed. pushing us towards a more scriptural basis for our everyday faith. And more recently, under King Edward, we've seen what he can do with a Protestant king. He's put systematically, and despite great pushback, as many policies aimed towards reformation that he possibly can. Things like his steadfast belief in free salvation, the idea that the Eucharist is not some sort of sacrificial appeasement on the part of the priest, and the whole thrust of his prayer book seem to speak rather clearly to me that he has no intention of coming over to Catholicism. I think, as do many of his supporters, that the recantations he has thus far signed are forgeries. And even if they aren't, they have clearly been given under duress. We'll have to see what his last words will be, but it's my hope that he will die as he has lived, an architect of the Reformation in England.
Well, there you have it, Germany. Thanks for joining us, Tom. Keep reading those books, and we'll see you next time.
And a hearty thank you to you, Sir Edward.
That's all for Henry's Heresies today, where we give you the Historia and Theoria while keeping it light, friendly, and entertaining. If this is your first time joining us today, be sure to check out all of our previous episodes where we give you the juicy gossip in Europe, including interviews from Martin Luther, King Henry VIII, and Hitler. Just kidding, not Hitler. And cut! Cindy, where's my beer, sausage, and gingerbread?